Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Erik Huey. I'm the Senior Vice President of Government Affairs for the Entertainment Software Association. And welcome to E3, the 22nd E3, and welcome to the 8th Annual Games and Education Learning Summit here at USC. We're thrilled to have you this morning. We've got a terrific day. We'll go around the room and introduce everybody briefly, but we're really excited that this year, for the first time ever, we are broadcasting live on the ESA Gov Games Twitch channel, and that will be archived for later. So if you are taking copious notes, but get distracted and enraptured by everything that's said here on this afternoon, you have a chance to go back and watch. And please do spread the word. Please do tweet about it or use social media. We do want to spread the word about the Games and Learning Summit. Was I cutting out? Yeah. Hopefully this is a little bit better. So I'm the Senior Vice President of Government Affairs, and we're thrilled to have everybody here in the room. It's going to be a great day. You're going to hear from some of the leading thinkers and visionaries in video games. And video games are at the cutting edge of the technology that's changing the interface between mankind and machines. This industry is growing at an exponential rate. And as we think about where VR and AR and MR are going, we think about where esports are going, where we think about streaming. These are things that we weren't talking about even within the industry 4 and 5 years ago at this summit. The potential is utterly unlimited, and we're thrilled to be a part of it. This industry is now a $30 billion U.S. industry. We're $110 billion worldwide. And when you think about that and take a look at the top 20 video games of last year, 65% of them were made in the United States. That means that the jobs and innovations that's happening here is going worldwide. And as you'll see throughout the day, because we're going to go to the show floor later after the summit, you'll see people in the middle of that transition. As Craig Hagan likes to say from Electronic Arts, 10 years ago, we made silver shiny discs. We put them on a boat in China. They came into the port of Long Beach, and they were loaded onto a bunch of vans, and they went to GameStops along the country. That was the distribution method. And the interface with the consumer was their local brick and mortar store. Now, EA, 40% of their revenues are direct online downloads. So people can go day of, instantaneous worldwide release and download. And not only, in the old days, you put a game out, and then you forgot about it for 2 or 3 years. You would ship it and forget it, and then if it was Madden, you'd come up with the title next year, or Call of Duty. But now they're doing updates daily. And the interface with the consumer and the conversation with the consumer and the communities that are building around these games is growing, and it's going on at all time. All of these companies have heat maps as to who's playing their game around the world and how they're playing the game. And the communities around the game, they're getting terabytes and terabytes of information. So all of this leads to some interesting policy questions, which we'll be discussing today. And we'll be glimpsing into the future of this industry, which really is changing the interface between mankind and machines. So with that, I want to talk a little bit about the Higher Education Video Game Alliance and introduce Constance Steinkuhler. Dr. Constance Steinkuhler is the head of HEVGA. And HEVGA is a consortium of the top 300 plus colleges and universities here in the US and around the world that teach video game design. There are now nearly 500 video game colleges and universities that teach video game design. They have a program, or they have a major, or they have a master's program, or they have a PhD. These are the kids that are coming out of these programs, and they're making $98,000 a year in this industry. Our industry has jobs in 84% of congressional districts. There are 220,000 people employed around the country. And the industry, of course, is now larger than box office, Hollywood, and the music industry combined. So it's a really exciting time. We're in the middle of a variety of different transitions. You're going to see that on the show floor. You're going to see the excitement. And for the first time ever, we have 15,000 people coming to the show floor. Many of them are students who are graduated from many of the HEVGA programs. Constance Steinkuhler we've been working with for a long time since she was at the White House as the video game czar, for lack of a better title. So I'll hand it over to you and kick us off.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. So I'm very grateful to be here in front of this audience. This has been a continued meeting that ESA has put together before their E3 show for years, and it has been incredibly productive in terms of conversations. So I'm really excited about getting to it. I wanted to say a little bit about what we know about programs and kind of a call to action for people here. So I worked in DC through about 2012, 2013, and then after that formed this higher education video game alliance because there really was no sort of coordination across the programs at universities and on campuses that are doing game design, doing game studies. So we organized this institution. It's a 501c6, and it helps us coordinate across those campuses to think about what should programs look like, what should our mission be, how do we find out to make sure our alumni are doing well. And our first data sets were really surprising. When we first started, there were, I think in our first count, there were over 400 programs in the US that have some form of games on their campus for research or design. Those numbers are now well over 900. Our organization represents more than 500 members and is growing at like a 25% rate every year. Our mission is really focused on three things. Thinking about advocating for the importance of games as a medium. So I think of games as an art medium, as a medium for communication. And as we're going to talk about here, it's also a medium for intervention of various sorts, right? You can change hearts and minds through giving them direct first-person experiences, which games provide, which is part of what makes them so alluring. The second part of our mission is really emphasizing their economic importance, and with the help of ESA, thinking about things, for example, like how our programs on campuses actually don't just fill jobs, but create jobs. So when you look at state by state disaggregated, it turns out there is a 0.9 correlation within state between number of programs in higher ed that focus on games and number of studios in the state. Our programs are creating jobs for the American public, and that's incredibly important, especially right now. The third thing we emphasize, though, is scientific importance. So I've spent the last 15 years, like many of the other scholars, Adam and others here, who have worked with games and sort of come at it, not necessarily from a games first perspective, but instead as looking at the power of games as a sort of transformative interactive media. And it has been really great to see ESA sort of help us usher along some of that scientific work, in addition in the conversation around the scientific work that can address issues like public concern, that can address issues like public concern not just about games and screen time, but also about larger big issues like immigration or poverty, actually educating and intervening in the public in issues like health. So I find it to be a really exciting time for games, believe it or not. It's a very sort of turmoil period of history, but as they taught me in DC, never let a crisis go to waste. So I hope that's part of the conversation we have here, and I'm grateful to be here. One plug I would say, I can tell you about how well our alumni do, how successful our programs are, blah, 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 blah. I do want to say that one of the reasons I got into this, my background is Games for Impact. And one of the reasons I got into this was that a lot of the work I saw happening, 5-7 years ago was Games for Impact being created or sort of conceptualized in silos that are disciplinary bound, but not connected to really great game design of what we know is in the industry. So part of the reason this institution's really important to me is that I have this personal mission to get the conversation about games and learning or conversation about games and health out of a pink ghetto and into conversations with all of the designers that we are now educating to enter the market. And I think it's not only doable, but I think we're doing it now. So I would love to have that conversation with people who are interested in. And I'll hand it back.
Thank you, Constance. And I was remiss, I did not thank our hosts, University of Southern California, and Sam Roberts, and Tracy Fullerton, and the whole USC program, which was a founding institution, one of the 5 founding institutions of the Higher Education Video Game Alliance. We're going to ask our first round of panelists, as well as our moderator, Kevin O'Hanlon, Susanna Pollack, Jessica Lindell, and Dr. Adam Ghazali to come up. And as we do that, we'll go around the room and just briefly introduce yourself and what organization that you represent. And we're not going to pass the mic, so just speak loudly. Okay.
Michael Kuboyan, Congressman Carter Hall's office.
Okay.
Landon Zinda with Congressman Tom Emmerich from Minnesota.
Shanna Chandler with Congressman Adam Smith's office from Washington State.
Dwayne Carson with the Republican Study Committee.
Elliot Fopp with Congressman Rupersberger's office from Maryland.
Andres Salguera, Office of Digital Services Industries, U.S. Department of Commerce.
Okay. We'll go up and then we'll ask.
Walker Dahlman with the Office of Congressman Rick Allen out of Georgia.
Michael Wolter, I'm with Congressman Drew Ferguson as well. Ed Rosen with Congressman Blaine Meyer of Missouri.
Clay Graves from the Webby Awards.
Angela Corolla from the Webby Awards.
Nairobi Fatty, Congressman from Glenmore, Wisconsin.
Sarah Templeton with Annenberg Tech.
Leah Bernthal with Annenberg Tech.
Hi, Rebecca Fleming with the Milken Institute.
Hi, Carolyn Carroll, also with the Milken Institute.
Tom Folks with the Entertainment Software Association.
USC, the Atlas Collective.
Mirza Walker with Mind Minds.
Timothy Gregg with Mind Minds.
Okay, up to the next row.
Andy Morris with the Entertainment Software Association Foundation.
Vincent Lee with the Foundation Scholars.
Teresa Barr, former USC scholar.
Ali Bahushman with Magic League.
Katie Kratos with the Daily Walker.
Tim Johnson, ESA.
Catherine Gunter, ESA.
Missy Foxman, ESA.
Korea Ferris, which is political science student.
Greg Hagan with EA.
Katie Wallace, Games for Change with American Games.
Sasha Krishna, EA, former EA scholar.
Nice to be
Jen Lake with the Corporate Giving Connection.
Nika?
Nika Noor, ESA.
Matthew Akvan, UCI Esports. Mark Deppy, UC Irvine Esports.
Duncan Ransom with the Endless Collective.
Brian Petroselli, Twitch.
Terrific. Well, welcome everybody. We particularly want to welcome our the congressional staff who traveled from Washington, D.C. last night. We greatly appreciate you being here. We encourage you to check out the website since the Webby folks are here, and we want a Webby for this website. It's areweinyourstate.org, and it goes through. It's a heat map of the United States, and it overlays the colleges and universities with that teach video game design with the 3,000 video game companies in the United States. So you can go into a state or into a congressional district and see where the video game industry is alive and well, and where these creative clusters are forming. We have a lot of different people from a lot of backgrounds. We ask each of you to please join in the conversation. Think through what you're hearing today through the prism of your organization and potential partnerships. We have given birth in this forum to a number of things: Glass Lab, the National STEM Video Game Challenge, and a whole range of other initiatives. So we're thrilled to hear about that. Kevin, I'll hand it to you to take us through our first panel. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you to our panelists for joining us today. So everybody knows that video games are an entertainment format, and they're a growing entertainment format. The games and experiences that you'll see over the course of the day on the show floor really demonstrate that video games are art, and you'll see kind of the intersection of art and entertainment. But what a lot of people don't realize is that games can go immensely far beyond just an entertainment product. So the folks that we have up here today represent, as Constance was saying, education, we have impact, and health. And games can be impactful across various sectors of life. And this is a topic about which I'm personally very passionate. We also have the Entertainment Software Foundation that does a lot of work in this space as well. But I'm fortunate in this case that I'm joined by folks who are a lot smarter on this issue than I am. If each of you would just give kind of a 2 to 3 minute introduction about yourself, who you are, who you're with, you will do a much better job than I will. So Constance, I know you just spoke, but...
Hi, I'm back. Let's go again. I'm also at UC Irvine, and I study games and learning historically, and I'm just getting my toe into esports thanks to Mark Deppy and our arena.
Hi, I'm Susanna Pollack. I'm president of Games for Change. We're a 14-year-old not-for-profit whose mission is to empower social innovators and game developers to use digital games to drive impact. Our community is a very interesting cross-discipline and public and private community of not only great game developers who are making content that are impacting health and social and civic issues and learning, but also NGOs and foundations and government agencies who are tapping into this powerful medium. And we act as a convener, bringing all these people together to help foster partnerships and collaboration. We also work with youth, not with higher education at the moment, working public and middle school students, introducing them into game design with a civic impact focus. We're actually going to be launching a student challenge in Los Angeles with the support of Annenberg Tech, where we are allowing kids to learn how to make games, connect social issues like climate change, like immigrant issues, immigrant stories, and designing games that actually can have impact.
Hi, I'm Jessica Lindell. My background is in games and learning. I had the honor of working with Erik and the ESA team and Craig, who introduced himself at EA, on the creation of Glass Lab. And I'm now the global head of education at Unity Technologies. Do we want to pause and have other people introduce, or should we just keep going through?
Introduce Adam,
Okay.
and then we'll have the folks introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Adam Ghazali. I'm a professor in neurology and psychiatry at University of California, San Francisco. I'm also the co-founder of a company called the Kili Interactive Labs. We design and develop video games from scratch, working with professionals in the industry as well as our own team for impact on brain function. As a neuroscientist and a neurologist, we recognize there's a big deficit in how we treat numerous conditions, pretty much all the conditions of the mind and the brain, and we think that the experiences that can be delivered through targeted adaptive video games could have an impact in that domain. So we build our games, and then we do very deep dive research studies with functional brain imaging to understand how video games can have a meaningful and sustainable impact on how brains function.
If some new folks join, do we want to just please introduce yourself for the benefit of everybody?
Sure. Oh, sorry. I'm John Willis. I'm a student trying to learn a little bit more about VR and all that kind of stuff that goes along with it.
I'm Danny, and I make mobile video games.
I'm Gemma. I'm here with Discover Labs. We're an education and VR company.
I think some folks.
John Watts from the Atlantic Council in DC. We're doing some gaming for resilience and other kind of ways of engaging people in sort of more intellectual pursuits rather than just writing old boring reports.
Alex Paul, also from the Atlantic Council.
Erik?
Erik Martin, former White House Office of Science and Tech Policy, curating VR for Change at Games for Change, and soon joining Unity.
Okay. Well, part of what we do is matchmaking, so there will be a break. So everybody feel free to mingle and exchange some business cards. Back to the panel.
All right, so I want to start, we have folks from kind of all levels of background on video games at this point, so I want to start with the softball for you. When you're talking about games for impact, for health, for education, what do these games look like? What's the type of experience the users have? Are we talking about a large cinematic experience like the AAA titles you see advertised, or are we talking something that's more inherently targeted to the demographic that you need to reach?
From a high level perspective, a broader, from a high level view, I think the answer is it really is about the audience you're looking to reach and the outcome you're looking to achieve. So when we work with non-game designers about a game that they want to develop to achieve a certain goal, we immediately, have a conversation about the outcome that you're interested in achieving and the audience that you're looking to reach. So the outcome could be transfer of knowledge and education. That'll direct you in one path. The outcome could be about building awareness around a social issue. And the audience that you might want to reach might be a student in middle school, or the audience might be a casual gamer who's playing this on your mobile phone. So the answer really is that I think there are numerous ways to approach what kind of game you're going to design for which audience, and looking at the outcome is going to have a huge impact.
Well, I can tell you our game development pathway has two main focuses. The first is to create game mechanics that target brain functions we're trying to improve. So for example, we have a meditation-inspired video game, a rhythm video game to build up anticipation and timing processes in the brain. So we start with our neuroscientific foundation of what we want to build, and then we work just like most people in the industry do. How do you create immersive, engaging experiences for those populations that we're targeting? Sometimes it's mobile games. We do a lot in VR now and motion capture. So we really bring together scientists and game development professionals to create something that I think is quite unique. On the surface, it would look like any video game that was built for entertainment purposes, but it's what's under the hood that we spend often a couple of years developing and then testing in a very detailed way to figure out, does it do what we hope it will do?
And then I think just adding to that, we had the privilege at Glass Lab of taking incredible IP like SimCity and Plants vs. Zombies that was seen as just pure entertainment, and being able to take the data and analytics that come off of that gameplay to prove that critical thinking and problem-solving skills were actually better built by those games than by traditional methodologies like textbooks and traditional classroom instruction. So I think the answer is all of the above.
I love that segue. I was actually, my next question here was going to be, what's the relationship between some of these games there we go, and commercial games? So can you use commercial games to achieve similar outcomes? What success have you seen with commercial games for this purpose?
I really cut my teeth studying commercial games exclusively and looking at, I mean, at the time, this was, early 2000s, and there was a lot of trepidation around kids and screen time and games, and are they antisocial, are they this or that? But when you looked at the amount of time they were spending on games, it's actually far greater than the time they spend on homework. So I had, a lot of my first decade of research was really looking at what are the cognitive, what's the intellectual life of games, what are kids doing? And of course it turns out, no surprise for any of you here, because I presume if you're here you actually have played a game before, that it requires, depending on the game, but it can be quite demanding in terms of cognitive skills, problem solving, literacy, etc. So I would say that there is absolutely no difference in terms of level of impact. It depends on, sort of the framework that it's placed in, right? I mean, I personally play a lot of Minecraft because I have young children. So I can get on Minecraft and do very stupid things, or I can get on Minecraft and do beautiful work as well. And it may not necessarily always be obvious which is beautiful and productive and which one is button mashing. I mean, for example, my pranks are actually beautiful and wonderful when I blow stuff up. That's the best part. But just saying that I think commercial games have a tremendous amount of impact as well. We found in our labs that there's something around the context of gaming that having a community of people that actually ask you questions about why, or have students, especially young people, talking and reflecting seems to be one of the special tricks about how to make games impactful. So I guess I'll hand it over to others who have worked with commercial games.
Nothing to add.
I could just tell you that our inspiration is from the work in commercial games. The data that shows that games like first-person shooter video games can have a positive impact on cognitive abilities. There are many, many studies that have shown that. And so we were inspired by that and then asked the question, if we built a game from scratch using design principles that we could glean from existing games, but built them targeted to really have this impact and then don't abandon the entertainment aspects, still focus on art, music, story, reward, which are part of all great games, and you put that together from the beginning, can we build something that's even more impactful? But the consumer game world is what inspired us to do this in the first place.
I do have something to add, actually. I take that back. So I think just from the opportunity for those of you who are designing and developing today, I think there's been a significant change powered by Unity and other engines that you can create this incredibly high quality game with a small team and smaller resources compared to the larger game companies, which I think is a big breakthrough when it comes to the impact side of games and learning.
I'll echo that as a user. All of our development is done in Unity, and I think that we might not have been able to do what we now do without having sort of the democratization of game development take place, where you don't need to have just a giant high-powered studio, but you can have an artist and a programmer working together and really create something amazing. So that's been an entire game changer, so to speak, I would say.
So Jessica, you're only 6 weeks on the job at Unity, so I apologize for this question. But really to that end, what is driving Unity to kind of reach the educational goals that they are? Why does Unity, as a private company, have this commitment to getting so many new users? Obviously, there's a commercial aspect to it, but what's the driving force behind it?
Sure, absolutely. So although I'm only 6 weeks into this role, I also have been a long-time Unity user and have stayed close to the company for the last 5 years. Just to take a step back, the goals that we have at Unity, building on Adam's democratization comment, are really enabling everybody globally, and I want to emphasize globally, to become a creator. So ensuring that the tools can be used by not just game developers, but artists, and moving into non-programmers as well, is strategically where we're heading to unlock that creative opportunity for all types of learners globally. The second goal that we have is really looking at how do we democratize opportunity. So my own career path, moving from Glass Lab and then moving into the job skill area, by way of realizing, working in this industry, that the game industry is quite unique. It doesn't demand, coming from Silicon Valley, it doesn't demand like the HBS undergrad or the HBS degree and the Stanford undergrad. It really does unlock opportunity for anybody who wants to work hard and become a creator. And that for me was really inspiring as I was working in the game industry and then started moving into job skill preparation. And so from the alignment with my own focus on impact and Unity's, that we do have a desire to really unlock that opportunity for all creators as well. So it's not just creating for a hobby, it's creating for a career path. And if you go on Unity, you'll see the Unity Connect area of our site, which is essentially a talent marketplace for all types of developers and artists and creators globally, really leading with their portfolio of work and having sort of the education and pedigree be behind the scenes. And that for me and for Unity was incredibly important, because I think without unlocking globally all types of creators to have opportunity, the quality of the games and the quality of the impact is not going to be at the level that it should be at. So looking at how we are defining not just creating for all, but opportunity for all is a real strategy and direction for us. The part around why are we doing this, to be clear, it's not, we are for profit and it's not totally benevolent, is that every time a developer or creator is using Unity and publishing on Unity, anytime you're downloading a game on your phone or iPad or your console, you're downloading the Unity software. And so we're serving analytics and ads on that platform and monetizing it. So really from a business perspective, it's the opportunity to be able to monetize the over 2.5 billion devices that currently are running Unity.
So I'm going to piggyback off that. And Adam, I was looking at the work that your lab is doing on specialty input devices, and again, trying to democratize access here. So can you speak a little bit to the research that you're doing and trying to make sure that all users are able to interact with your technologies?
Yeah, so it's an incredible opportunity, as everyone obviously appreciates, to get what might be in the near future viewed as a new type of medicine. I could talk about that more, but also an educational tool. And we actually almost don't distinguish between them so much anymore, whether you're trying to improve a brain that has deficits that we think has a disease or neurological psychiatric condition, or healthy minds that are just developing at any age, what we think of as education or wellness. We see the potential for game technology to improve function across all those populations, including the elite side, like athletes and military and other, executives and professionals. So that, which was not part of our initial vision, but it's part of our mission right now, has been an incredible transition to not realize that we're focusing on just, children with autism. Not that that's not a worthy goal in itself, but that it could be generalized. What we learn in that population applies to all school children. And then, of course, mobile technology is impossible to ignore as a focus because it's just ubiquitous. We can't get teachers or doctors into many places in this world, but very soon everyone will have a mobile device and internet connectivity. So that opportunity is amazing. We have projects right now in India with young people who are engaging in our meditation training apps to try to improve their attention ability. We think it's an incredible means of addressing disparity issues. School children that can't get to school every day but have a phone or a tablet and can play something that helps improve their thinking. So that is an irresistibly attractive domain of the accessibility of technology. So essentially writing off of the consumer world and the innovation that's just explosive, as we all know, and leveraging that and saying, okay, we're going to use all this amazing hardware, software, brilliant minds that are creating this. Most of it, as we know, is targeted to entertainment, communication, and media, and say, how about if we reinvent this and then validate these as tools to help improve our minds? So that opportunity and its sort of pervasiveness is exciting.
So Susanna, as a convener here, for kind of the games that you work with, what have you learned about achieving scale and higher production value to try and get some of these games to market? What are the barriers?
So we discuss a lot of those challenges at the Games for Change Festival that we run every year, and particularly in the games and learning side, I think the challenge of getting games into the classroom and distribution into the K-12 market is one that is a huge opportunity, but needs to have buy-in on the administrator side and the school district side. And I think that is part of our challenge, is to educate the buyers, really, of these products for use in the classroom, right? These great products are being made. The distribution methods are challenged. But also, there's also the challenge of raising the bar of those games so that they can be competitive with a commercial game, just for the virtue of getting kids' attention, right? And they're seeing a lot more players coming into the space that are excited to explore, whether it's companies like Ubisoft with Assassin's Creed. I mean, we spoke with this at the festival last year, how there were teachers around the country who are creating mods of Assassin's Creed because they've got a generation of youth getting excited about world history, and they want to use that in the classroom. And so conversations with studios talked about the commercial, games industry, but how to participate in that space. Last year, it was announced that Civilization is being turned into an EDU project with Glass Lab, and I think there's more engagement we can about the opportunity of these games that are being made with such integrity and such research that they are that they, as a byproduct, are actually teaching kids and getting youth excited about issues without actually realizing that they're learning. So I think that that is part of our goal, is to excite the commercial game developers to move into the space, whether as part of their corporate strategy or engaging with smaller developers who have the research and the academic backgrounds to help build these games and marrying them with the talent.
I would just add too that right now, in the last several years, we've sort of entered this, what I would call, the golden age of games, where there's not just an indie, not just fantastic AAA companies, but mid-sized companies and small indie shops, and they're producing games that I would ostensibly call games for impact, because they have some form of point of view or some sort of goal beyond just high score, and they're a natural part of the indie market. So part of what we're seeing, is not just this philanthropic effort, but sort of the, as I said, sort of taking games for impact, or thinking about games that might actually do great things for people or communicate great ideas, right, of whatever version you say, but creating a market in which designers generally are interested, and players, not just mothers buying for their kids, but players download those games and play them as a natural part of their gameplay. And I think that's really exciting, that a market went from blue ocean to now there is a market that will purchase those games and not think twice about the fact that it's Spell Tower or really bad chess, right? So I think that's great.
Yeah, I think also from the consumer market, the introduction of Steam has also democratized the distribution methods for those indie and the mid-sized developers. And so you'll find projects like Paper Please, which was made by an independent developer, breaking through and becoming a major hit. And it's a game that's basically about immigration control and putting you into the perspective of what it'd be like to make those decisions that are life and death for immigrants and people to process to come through into countries. So I think that has had a big impact.
And so that's a good example. What are other kind of examples here for people who actually want to go and look up some of these games for impact for health? What are some of the good accessible titles that you would not necessarily recommend, but what are some of the games in this ecosystem right now?
Sure,
We all give our best.
Yeah.
I would like to hear your best guess on this one, actually.
Yeah.
Best games, you want to go?
Well, for health games, I'm pretty picky because we develop them, and I think that it's hard for me to comment generally. I can tell you games that have inspired me to build the type of cognitive games that we create. I'd say the top of my list is Portal 2, as a game that sort of transformed how I thought about consumer games and became something that is sort of like a goal in the future to create something of such depth and also fun. So I'll throw that out.
I'm going to add in not a game, but a VR experience that I think is really compelling for education. If you guys aren't familiar with Lifelike, and not a K, but a Q, in really understanding science. If you see their implementation, there's a hardware challenge, obviously, from a middle school and high school perspective on VR, but when you see the implementation, you know, the one kid in the classroom with the one pair of goggles has them on, but the whole class is watching the learning experience and really transfixed by it, and I just think that's a really compelling new approach.
I look at games like this all the time, and it's so hard for me to pick my favorite. But something that in the impact space that I think has struck me for a variety of reasons is 1979 Revolution, which was made by an indie, but a mid-size indie named Ink Stories. Naveed Kansari came out of Rockstar, and he was a director of Grand Theft Auto, and he brought with him a very cinematic style to create a first-person shooter game, but also a narrative-based game about what it's like to have lived through the Iranian Revolution in the late 70s. And for me, it's not only exciting, it's tense as all hell to play, but you are immersed in a culture and an experience that you wouldn't have access to. And I love the fact that that they invested so much into the game. It looks gorgeous, and it has that impact.
You're up.
Adam, I think your game is fantastic. I cannot wait to see what they do with Civ, the educational version, as a Civ fanatic. Papers, Please, I just finished last weekend, and all I can say is that it's horribly hard, horribly cruel, and I couldn't stop playing it, which really irritates me. I'm like, it's so bad, restart. It's so bad, restart. As far as games for impact, you know, it's hard for me to draw a line around them. I think that you know, there are so many really interesting titles out there that now I sort of feel are this interesting space between impact and art pieces. Like Oxenfree is another one I just was looking at from sort of a social emotional learning perspective. So I think it depends on the frame that you use, but there really is this booming market out there. And I have to say that the democratization of both development platforms like Unity and distribution channels have really changed who can get in this game. I mean, when we first started, it was like these little prototypes. They didn't look anything like Adam stuff, right? They're like these little prototypes of an idea that you begged someone to fund to the next hurdle of development, and then if you weren't careful, they died. And now I think that that ecosystem is actually starting to sort of get beyond some of its earlier barriers and frictions into something where you see games out there. If you haven't played really bad chess and you want to understand chess, play really bad chess. It's just a great game.
I would also recommend, if you're looking for a good one, This War of Mine. It's a great way to go. Same as Constance was saying, it's one where you don't want to continue playing it. It's war from the perspective of civilians and the decisions that civilians have to make during wartime. It's incredibly depressing, but it's a fantastic, fantastic game about resource usage. Again, I mean, it's the games that you play. So the last question, then we'll turn it over for any audience questions here. So what's preventing some of these games from becoming large commercial successes, and looking at it through, especially from a policy lens, what are things that we can be doing from a policy perspective to help make these games easier to access or kind of help encourage the marketplace to grow?
It's like built for you.
Right, I'm like, please let me speak to this issue. So I worked on those policy issues with Mark DeLaura, who's sitting in the back, with Erik Martin, who's sitting up front, like trying to think about how to take games, how to help agencies and sort of national entities, both foundation, private, and government agencies, understand that interactive media, games, are this really potent medium to use, and that in fact they have really great ability to scale, to meet new markets, and not just young markets either, right? I mean, again, you're talking about designing a first-person experience. It's still to this day, there's this hang-up around the word games, so I refuse to stop using the word games because we need to get over that hang-up, especially at the national level. But when I first started in OSTP, there was, maybe, I think our first meeting of PIs was like about maybe 70, 75 PIs that were funding games, and then it was all the way up well past 200 by the time I left in 2012. The number of program officers interested in using games as a means to accomplish their agency's goals, for example, bringing in a new audience to national park system, or reducing childhood obesity, or creating new scientific developments in cancer. all of those, like it had really sort of blossomed into where if you called it interactive media, you could get some leverage. So I feel like that has really shifted now that the gamer generation has grown up and is now starting to make decisions, frankly, and understands games are not this strange black box. I do think, though, that there are these still, sort of ecosystem issues that no one funder is necessarily interested in solving, which I think is really unfortunate. In my experience with both private and public, especially private, they tend to really like funding a game that, they want a game that they can put their name on and say that was our game, that was our thing. And I get the instinct, and it's, it's a worthwhile strategy. But there are also ways in which you can get so much bigger of an ROI by trying to think about pipeline issues. You remember the conversations we had at Glass Lab? Trying to think about how can you take, for example, I work on the higher ed side. There is a tremendous amount of IP that is sitting on shelves that we have created a prototype. We've tested it in labs. We can show that it actually does great things for people, and it goes nowhere. It goes nowhere because no federal agency or foundation wants to pick it up and take it to the next hurdle. No one wants to help you put the marketing behind it to get it in the hands of people. So you link it out on the iTunes store and you're like, yay, success, and it's down at the bottom of millions of titles. So there are these sort of unsexy but really good problems that would not take a lot of effort to solve if we would simply have the will of solving them collectively. So I'm going to put my bid in for that.
I just have two add-ons to Constance's comments. One is, I feel like we have solved the development and design aspect of getting all of the quality up to the level of AAA games. What we haven't solved is the discovery side of it, and so I think that's a big unanswered question. I'm not sure if policy can help with that, but any help you can get would be great. The second, and this is just drawing from my experience, which is primarily from an institution perspective into K-12, is I'm just over systems. Like if we are trying to monetize and build a sustainable model based on a system, for example, selling into the K-12 system or the healthcare system, it's like game over. Don't even start. And I think that has been the challenge as we've thought about all of these different industries and the IP that's being created, is that the pipeline can't go into the system. It can go into a teacher, it can go into corporations who want to fund schools, but it can't, in my view, be sustainable and highly a high growth opportunity if it's going into the system directly.
I'll give you my perspective. It's sort of a little different, and it comes from my background as a neurologist and someone that, in a field that when we see a problem, we tend to think about one solution, and that solution usually are drugs, right? Small molecules, pharmaceuticals. And it's really frustrating because we don't have great drugs for the mind, for attention, depression, memory, anxiety. And so we have a hurdle in that physicians tend to think about medicine in a very particular way, and everything else is alternative and sits on the sides and doesn't get prescribed, doesn't get reimbursed. It's just out there, and that's unfortunate, and it's a big loss. So that's a hurdle that I recognize. And it's a policy issue, and that's because there are regulatory agencies that also sit in DC area, and they help determine what's safe and what's effective. And so we now have a pathway starting at my lab at UCSF, technology I created there, licensed by a company, Achille, which I co-founded many years ago now, that now has a game. It's a pretty high-level game developed by folks from LucasArts and EA and lots of professionals in the industry working with our teams of scientists. And that game is now in multiple clinical trials. Autism, traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, Alzheimer's disease. And now the one that's gotten the most attention is we have a phase 3 FDA trial. This is a multi-site trial, 15 different sites around the country. A phase 3 trial means it is the last phase of research that then goes on to FDA approval. So this trial is underway right now. It'll finish this year. And the target is a clinical indication of the game as a treatment for children with ADHD. So if it's successful, by the end of this year, it'll be the first non-drug treatment for ADHD and the first prescribable video game ever. So it's an exciting time. We'll see what happens. It's the jury, the research study is still going on. Thank you. And then, there are other big hurdles. Who's going to pay for this game? Will insurance providers pay? And will there be reimbursement? And will doctors actually reach into their pockets, pull out a prescription pad, and write 2 months of iPad game, see me, and we'll collect the data along the way? I believe that is the future that we will have in the next 3 years. The FDA essentially views this as a new category of medicine. So we currently have molecular medicine, which is almost everything we do. This would be like a form of digital medicine, an experiential treatment as opposed to a molecular treatment.
All right, so we've got time for just a few questions here, and then of course, if you have further questions, we're happy to put you through to the panelists afterwards. Yes?
Yeah, so Constance spoke on this, but I'm actually new to this to this field, and all I could think while you were talking is, well, why are they calling them games, and why is it entertainment? So from a policy and even communications perspective, is it just semantics, and why do we need to hold on to game, and what is the conversation around that?
Well, I'm an academic, but I hate heavy Latinates that are not necessary. I tend to not trust things that are wrapped up in language that is hard to understand. So, to me, they're games because interactive media is a mouthful we don't need. I'd be interested in how other people position toward that. I refuse to, I have a long conversation about play and our bizarre puritanical streak in the States, which would be much more suitable for a glass of wine later today, which I would love to have. But yeah, I refuse to give up the word games because it's a booming industry. It appeals to everyone who's ever touched a game, sort of gets it and knows that it's like talking about TV. Why would I stop? Why would I need to call it like something like the broadcasting living room box, right?
I'm sorry, can I clarify? Is it a policy hurdle though, because of the early comments?
Oh, no, thank you. No, we just called it interactive media. If it's going to get funds out to do projects that would actually save lives or help kids, we'll call it whatever you need. But I think that the word game to me is actually is important to stick with, I suppose, because that's what they are, and the rest of it seems like a lot of trying to dance around issues that are more about our cultural hang-ups than much else, which is really opinionated, and I apologize. What do you guys think?
I've been deep in this discussion. I wrote my first grant to the NIH for the game NeuroRacer, which eventually became a paper published in Nature. It was a great story in the end, but my first grant had video games in the title and throughout it, and my colleagues thought that was a really stupid idea, and they were right. It was a challenge. Just to put the word fun, that 3-letter word, in a grant seems to somehow make it superficial to many people. To me, it's the opposite. Fun is why it's a game. That part of it, that engagement, and not just the motivation and rewards, but the fun of a game, I think is critical for its positive effects in the domain that we work on, and I don't want to abandon that. And now we're fighting that battle many years later, not through the granting agency. Now I have many grants from the NIH about video games and fun, but as a company building a giant product in the healthcare industry, is video game and fun again an appropriate term? And I sit at board meetings fighting that battle again, that we don't want to abandon it. And it's true, what we've created is more than a video game in a classic sense. It has a whole ecosystem of communication with physicians and providers and all sorts of things that go on that are outside of the video game. But the video game engine is the core of what we're creating, and I fight all the time to preserve that language. I think it is what it is, and euphemizing, making a euphemism or trying to hide it, to me seems short-sighted.
All right, last question, and then as I said, we can have follow-ups afterwards.
Dwayne Carson here. I guess I have a question listening to all this, and this has been brilliant. With the advancement of technology and as malleable as minds are within the industry, is there a line between developing a leading conversation and then developing a game for impact? Within for example, you had the Assassin's Creed where you were kind of leading the conversation, whereas another nonprofit organization may have a game that is designed for their view on education, their view on what health should be, or on the social impact.
I'm not exactly sure what the question is. The question is, which is the better approach?
No. I was saying is as you are transforming minds, as they're coming up and they are having access to all these different games, is there a a line, and it may not exist, where where you are getting your agenda across, as opposed to letting them have the conversation as in the community of how to proceed forward on certain issues.
If I'm understanding your question, I think it's a really deep one that can't be answered. So you can talk about games as this art form, which means that eventually, games are not linear. Players do what they want to do, and that's what makes them magical. I'm the person having the experience, getting to sit in the seat of the narrator, the main character, whatever, right? So because of that, how do I put this? So if I get to do what I want in a game because it's interactive and it's my game, and I get to interpret it in the ways I want to interpret it, which is what makes it art, then how do you make that a game for impact, right? There's this weird tension around, look, you don't make art necessarily and say, but here's the interpretation I want you to have from it. I want you to know that 2 + 2 = 4, okay? 2 + 2 and it's 4, right? So I would honestly say in a very blunt way that if my message is 2 + 2 = 4, although math actually is great for games, if my message is a declarative fact in the world, sometimes just reading a brochure is a much better way to get to it. If my path is linear, then why bother with a game investment? Game investments are really transformative when it's something where I have to understand a system of complexity, and I have to come to understand how to predict that system, how to work within that system, etc. And then there is no, at the end of the day, I want you to conclude X about this game. It's that what you're trying to get is a conversation, for example, with Civ, where history is not merely the great man story. History is actually about global distribution of material goods, right? So I think that that's one place where you see games are not the right treatment for every goal. Does that help?
No, it does. It does. It was speaking to where I was.
Yeah, I want to add to that the player is a huge part of the development process, the iteration and the play testing. So it's a constant conversation, right, between the developers, the researchers, the assessment experts, and the content matter experts and the developers to see to get feedback on the player's experience. So I feel like it's a collaborative process as opposed to a single direction.
All right, well, we've got to move on to the next one, but if you'd like to, we'll provide contact information. You're welcome to follow up with us, and we'll send your questions along to the panelists afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you.
The best part about this event is having the catbird seat and getting to see these amazing panelists and really getting a glimpse into what the future, not just of games, but of societal interactions and education looks like. With that in mind, we want to bring up our next panelist. It's going to be moderated by Nika Noor of ESA, and we'll bring up Duncan, Gemma, Brian, and Mark.
Ayo. Good morning. Thanks, Kevin. That was a great first panel. I want to take a quick second. We had a cool social media interaction. I want everyone on the panel to wave hi to Marla Poor from Nintendo, who's tuning in today. So if everyone can, on the count of 3, say hi, Marla, in the audience. 1, 2, 3. Hi, Marla. Fantastic. Thank you for tuning in. So welcome. We are really excited to be here today, and what an awesome morning it is. We are literally here on a work day at 10 a.m. talking about video games. And not just video games, we're here to talk about the evolution that will be televised, VR, esports, and streaming. So I'm going to go through our panelists, and then we're going to give you guys a minute each to kind of discuss your background while you're here and tell us a fun fact about yourselves. So we've got Duncan Ransom, founder and CEO of the Endless Collective, Mark Depp, director of esports for UCI Irvine, Gemma Busani, co-founder of Discover Labs, and Brian Petrocelli, the product marketing manager for Twitch. You don't have a mic? There you go. No problem.
Hi everyone, I am Brian Petrocelli. I work at Twitch in marketing. I primarily handle all of our social features and things like that of how people interact while they're actually streaming. But as in many video game cultures, we adopt our own names at Twitch, so you guys can also call me Citizen. And as soon as I started working at Twitch about 1.5 years ago, I was enthralled with the idea that Twitch could be used to foster civic engagement and foster conversation. For those of you that don't know, Twitch is a website that allows broadcasters to stream their play sessions. It's primarily used for video games. However, we have been branching out into other areas. Currently, we have 10 million daily active users. We're the 8th most visited website in the world. It's kind of came out of nowhere over the last 5 or 6 years. And these users that come to our site every day, that come to view great content, spend an average of 102 minutes a day. So that's a little over like an hour and a half engaging with this content. And the reason is because in addition to the stream and the experience of getting to watch content, you get to interact there in the chat as well. And people form relationships, and that chat experience can actually impact what is happening on screen as those folks interact with one another. And it becomes a really, really collaborative experience in addition to something that is really great for fertilizing really deep and meaningful communities. Over the past year, we've had some really great experiences. We broadcast the Democratic National Convention in addition to the Republican National Convention, exposing that content to millions of people that may not have seen it otherwise. We got to work with the Obama administration, including Erik, and throwing in a stream from the White House to promote open enrollment in the Affordable Care Act. And just last week, we were able to broadcast the Comey testimony before the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. And today at 11:30 on twitch.tv/news, you'll be able to watch Jeff Sessions' testimony as well. And watching that with the Twitch chat in all its glory and all the memes and all the spam and all the just everything is a really, really awesome experience. Yeah, that's me.
Good morning. I'm Gemma Bassoni. I'm the co-founder of Discover Labs. We are a VR and education startup in San Francisco. We focus on K-12 vocational and professional training. And most recently, we just partnered with Michelle Obama on creating a Southside experience. So we're really excited for that.
Hello, my name is Duncan Ransom. I run a company called The Endless Collective. My background is in visual effects, kind of working on kind of large production Hollywood visual feature films, kind of heavy visual effects feature films for nearly 15 years. And I started to move into the immersive technology realm as a result of working in a nursing home in my late teenage years as a cleaner, and seeing that these people were entrapped. And they were, I guess in your late teens, you're obsessed with, yourself and how well you're going to do in school. And part-time, I'd be going to these nursing homes and seeing these people that are known as the forgotten generation. So this experience permeated through what I would build in films for that film degree that I did following. But what I noticed about 10 years after working in visual effects was that all of these tools that we're learning to make amazing movies that are in some ways inspiring, in other ways a complete waste of money and really uninspiring, perhaps we can take some of these technologies and learn what we've learned from creating incredible visual imagery and transposing that into tools that are actually socially beneficial. So it kind of speaks in many ways to the last panel, which is how do we kind of bridge this gap between tools that we're learning to make great video games and creating socially beneficial outcomes. But what we also do, we're a bunch of artists and we love kind of building art. So we try and converge art and technology and build experiments in art and technology, and one of which was the largest VR experience that's been done to date, with 6,000 people experiencing VR together while listening to a symphony orchestra with a 100-person choir. And it was a social experience which involved people with headsets on, but in fact experiencing this sonic display together. So we're interested in experiments in immersive technologies and how to bridge the gap between what we've learned so much about making great films and games and creating socially beneficial tools as well. So, thanks.
And my name is Mark Deppie. I have the pleasure of working with Constance at University of California, Irvine, just down the road here, an hour away, over 4 hours in traffic. Our program, we're one of maybe 30 institutions in the country that offer scholarships for top video gamers, similar to what you might see in a traditional athletic program. We recruit and find the best talented players to compete for our school in the biggest and best games out there in the world. And so that's kind of the shiny object, the piece that people latch onto our program. But we really focus on 4 things, 4 pillars. So we compete both with scholarship teams, and we support our club teams, which are all kind of nationally ranked or top ranked in North America. We also partner with our faculty on cool research projects. We did a cool neuroscience research project this year on how Minecraft and exploring in Minecraft 3D immersive spaces can kind of improve memory. We're doing a World of Warcraft language study where people play World of Warcraft in German and we see how they pick up a second language. We also funded 12 undergraduate research projects. So we did some cool stuff on the research side, really aligning with the academic mission of the university. And actually we also hosted a symposium a few weeks ago. We brought some of the top academics in games and learning to kind of have a discussion around esports at UCI, and that was on Twitch. Our third pillar is community. Esports is this really big communal thing. It is a gajillion people watching and playing and competing their favorite games together, and UCI has one of the, if not the biggest gaming community in all of North America. So we were ranked the #1 school for gamers by College Magazine a few years ago. It's really our community success that kind of inspired and kind of helped support our program. And our fourth pillar is entertainment. So it is creating content for Twitch and YouTube and creating live event experiences and social engagement and engaging with the 90-something% of college kids that play video games. Now, instead of them playing with their high school friends in dorm rooms, we're engaging with them and connecting with them. So we're focused on competing, research, community entertainment, and we think we're one of the best college programs out there.
Fantastic. You know, VR, esports, streaming, this stuff isn't new. It's been around for a while, but we're starting to see some serious traction in these topics in the video game industry. Where do you guys think it's going to evolve in the next 3 to 5 years, especially in terms of where we are now?
So one of the things that I'm really passionate about for Twitch is that it's worked for games really well because we have a community that for a long time before the internet, we were separated by the thing that we were passionate about. And what Twitch did is it kind of brought that all to the forefront and brought people together from across the world to be able to enjoy that content together. But what's interesting is that when you have this experience, when you have, it's not only just, there's not just a one-way relationship between broadcast and audience, it's that the audience is directly impacting the broadcast. One of the coolest things that I've seen that's happening right now is folks are playing a lot of Dungeons & Dragons on Twitch. And it's been really great to watch that improv to get into the characters, but one thing that's been really, really cool that some of the companies are doing is that the chat itself has the ability to influence what is happening in the game. So if the chat is kind of tipping in money or kind of tweeting certain hashtags, you know, the lighting in the studio changes from red to white. And if it's white, you know, the community is rooting for the players to get the Dungeon Master to give them a little bit of a boost in the game that they're playing. And if it turns red, the players start to know that the chat is not on their side and that something terrible is about to happen. And so when you have that type of relationship, there's a lot of things that are really possible. Super minor spoiler for House of Cards this season, but a candidate actually uses a 24-hour live stream to engage with voters. Like this is kind of, in just this past weekend, Katy Perry on YouTube, not on Twitch sadly, did 4 days of just live streaming her life and interacting with the chat there as well. So there's some really, really cool things that are going to kind of start to be a little bit more transformative when you look into the realm of streaming.
Might just jump in. An example that I use actually a lot is, I think when you're younger, you're trying to get this acceptance of your parents and you want them to be happy with the decisions you've made, the degree that you've chosen, and you know what you've achieved, your career path and whatnot. As you get older, you know, some people hang on to that. I think most people just let go of it. They don't feel this need for validation. And you know, I've spoken to people that find it difficult actually to impress their parents. They kind of want to do these, impress the parents. And I think when you work in an aged care home, what we did, we tested these therapeutic meditation tools in aged care homes for about 4 months in virtual reality. And it was interesting because there's this assumption that people of that age, they don't connect with technology. But when you put a VR headset on these people, and we do it very carefully, we don't just kind of run around thinking we're fixing the world with VR headsets. I think you have to have these deeper conversations. It was great to hear actually the amount of study protocols being built and the delicate hand with which people are approaching these protocols and people that are extremely fragile. But what I noticed is that when you engage these people with these environments, because it's completely immersive, there is this sense of kind of childlike awe that comes over them. And when we're talking about impressing people, I think it's harder to impress people as they get older. And what we found is that these people were aged between 70 and 100, yet we were putting them in childlike awe states. And I think that's a really interesting thing. I don't know if any of you have this observation. When I go home to Australia, my parents are always on their iPad. And you know, a lot of people assume that this is just children, but I think that technology is being adopted by not, you know, this is an interesting figure here. 35 years old is your average gamer age, but you know, I think that in terms of interacting with technology, we're seeing huge growth in the aging population beyond 50, because the tools are becoming more intuitive. So, yeah.
And if I could just add, I think the technology that we're all witnessing, kind of the proliferation of internet technology, whatever we're going to call it, has really changed our expectations around entertainment and engagement. And so when we look at the most visited websites in the world, like Facebook or Twitch or, I don't know, you can name a bunch, they're all free to access. So I think one of the fundamental changes is that we now expect free access to nearly unlimited content, and that's what the internet provides. Obviously there's premiums and upsells and things you could do, but I'm very bullish on esports because it is a way to engage with entertainment free that cable television, other kind of forms of media that we've traditionally relied on, don't see. I also think esports is really interesting, or video games are interesting, because it pits people of equal skill level against each other. So you might play a game with a 75-year-old grandpa, or if you're a 12-year-old boy in, I don't know, some other state. But it's all about skill level. It's not about who you are, and not about these traditional barriers we create. So I think that's another reason games and esports are really interesting, is that through digital mediums, games, controllers, whatever, consoles, you're competing against people your skill level, not necessarily your gender, your race, religion, your conference, your state, your city, whatever it is. And so I think it opens it up to a much broader audience. And then one other thing that I think is really powerful, that I get really frustrated with in traditional sports, and I watched the NBA Finals last night, and I think you could argue that with like 5 different calls in any given game, the outcome could be completely reversed. So I think there's too much human interaction with traditional sports. And one thing with awesome thing about games is the algorithms, the games actually create the rules, so they're very fair and unbiased. And so the 3 expectations I think that internet technology has kind of created is: 1 is free access to unlimited entertainment. 2 is that everyone competes against the best or the people their ability level. And 3, it's very subjective. It's you compete against yourself or other people, but there's no outside influences kind of changing the outcome of the game. So those are 3 reasons I'm very bullish about esports, and what reasons I think they're very attractive to lots of people.
Gemma, you are so impressive. For those of you who don't know in the audience, Gemma started her company at 17 years old. So that makes you 18 right now. She's been funded by some incredible VCs, and you've gotten a lot of great funding. And when she talks about her work with Michelle Obama, she's being very modest. She was on the front cover hanging out with Michelle Obama, straight up doing an awesome photo shoot about the incredible work you do. I mean, I'm very interested about what you think about how VR has impacted esports and where we might go in non-game based applications for the future.
Well, esports is very interesting. I was really lucky in that my former housemate worked at Riot, and he was the lead API engineer. So I spent a lot of time at the office and a lot of time tinkering with VR stuff there. And I think that like these gaming companies they know it's coming. They're not necessarily ready for it. A lot of it is just figuring out a way to like format their game in which it can be experienced in VR. So I know like the times that I've ported League of Legends to my VR headset, it's been terrible. Like I don't know where to look. There's so many like different battles happening. Like the most that you can do is spectate, but you can't spectate very well. So I think it really depends on the type of game for which it'll be really good for. But as a really large VR enthusiast, I can definitely say that for some games it doesn't make sense, but for other games it makes definitely quite a lot of sense.
And what about the non-game based applications for VR?
Non-game based applications. Well, clearly I feel very passionate about the education end. I think the work that you're doing is really fantastic as well. We very briefly did a like a pilot with some retirement homes. We realized other people can do it better since our standards for figuring out what a good experience is follow like retention rates and whatnot. You can't really test seniors on retention rates, doesn't make sense. But I do think that bringing experiences to people, being able to like educate people in new ways, and just immersive technology as a whole will move forward education quite a lot. Right now we're doing a pilot with Marin County schools, and it's really exciting for us because they're installing it in every school. So every school will have at least 30 vibes in their school, and they're going to be testing all of our content. We've been doing this for 3 months already, and retention rates have gone up by 30%. And that's in a 3-month period, which for us was ginormous.
That's awesome. You know, talking about schools, Mark, can you talk to the audience a little bit about your facility at UCI, how it grew, what it is, and the community you've got on campus? Is UC Irvine on the cutting edge of where big institutions and universities can really take on esports as an emerging field in education?
So first of all, I'll talk a little about our program, and I would encourage you, if you want to look it up, you can Google it, YouTube. There's some cool videos that kind of highlight what our facility looks like. We have a 3,500 square foot esports arena. Essentially, it is we're the only. I mentioned 30 schools that offer scholarships. We're the only one that's self-funded. We knew as a public institution we couldn't just ask our chancellor for $1 million, so we kind of proposed the idea of, what if there's a program and we find the funding for it? Will you let it happen? They said, sure, go for it. And so we built this arena in the student center. It has 80 really powerful PCs. It's kind of built on this Asian business model of PC Cafe, PC Bong in China, Korea. Essentially, people come in, you pay a few bucks an hour to play your favorite games on the best PCs with great internet in a very social setting. And it turns out that people are willing to pay for this social experience, a premium to play video games, just like you'd pay a premium to work out socially at a gym or pay a premium to have a beer socially at a bar. People want this social gaming experience. And so we are the first school that we know of on the planet that has this kind of high-end, competitive recreational facility that helps kind of offset some of our costs. And so it's a place where people play games recreationally. We have a community area where our gaming clubs, we have about 9 different gaming clubs where they can have weekly meetings. We have an internet and Twitch kind of YouTube broadcast station. So just like you see live play-by-play color commentary for football, basketball, baseball, people do that for video games, a whole career path of shoutcasting. And so you'll probably see that at E3 if you go to the esports area. But we are training people for careers that are just now emerging. So we have an entertainment area, and we also have our kind of stage competitive area where our club and scholarship teams practice and compete. So we have competition, we have recreation, we have community building, entertainment. All of our 4 pillars are kind of built in there. And then when we're not open to the public, we're open to our faculty for research. So we're working with our neuroscientists and our social scientists and everyone else that wants to collect some of the insane amount of data that we create in this arena.
Final question, and then we're going to open it up to the audience here for Duncan and Brian. You know, video games are an excellent source of entertainment, and sometimes our entertainment software opens up new boundaries and new barriers for other industries and other forms of content for the platforms that we create. How do you think we're going to branch out beyond our niche of gaming, which is huge, but into these other exciting categories and open doors for other industries?
I think it's really interesting. When I think about immersive technologies, I think it's consolidated nearly every industry. You know, I've had conversations with bankers and architects and landscape designers, and you know, they all have an idea that they could use immersive technologies for. So I think it will. How will it change? I think it will accelerate, no doubt, because I think there's an adoption and a connection to these technologies that doesn't require a high kind of learning rate, or you know, you don't have to read a heavy instruction manual to figure this out. So I think, you know, with more intuitive ways to interact with these technologies, we'll start to see some interesting experiments. An interesting one we did recently was we were tasked by Google to actually go to the Alabama kind of NASA facility and take some of this information that they've gathered from the Voyager 1 and 2 missions. And you know, it's an amazing mission. This spacecraft has left our solar system. It's the only machine that's ever done it. You know, when we potentially wipe our civilization out, this may be the only machine that's still cruising beyond our solar system. So it's been collecting data through 6 different antennas for the last, I think, about 40 years. And all of this data is being collected. And we're talking about, data that's not being used. That's just been sitting in NASA, and, a kind of a very tight-knit group of people understand what that actually means. So we're brought on to take that data and push it through, I guess, effects creation engines. There's one called Houdini, and we push it through these Houdini engines, and we can suddenly visualize on a visual bandwidth, because we can't usually see these magnetic fields and these cosmic radiation waves. But when we push it through Houdini, we can visualize these things, and we can actually see what they call the heliosphere, which is the border at the edge of the solar system. So, this is a form of entertainment, you could say, but it's a way to visualize things that we could never see before. So I think that's one of the ways, certainly, in visualization. Yeah.
So, I firmly believe that the way that Twitch has the entertainment experience that Twitch offers is going to revolutionize the way that we think about just video content in general. It worked. For those that don't know the history of our company, we started as Justin TV. It was you could stream anything you wanted to, and our founder, one of our founders, started watching competitive StarCraft matches and was like, "This is awesome." And the community loved it, and we decided to really focus on it. And the reason that it works is because, one, there's always a natural storyline regardless of what's happening. Is the player having fun? Are they not having fun? And even if nothing is really going on, you're staring at beautiful art that artists have spent hundreds of thousands of hours creating. Now, what we're actually talking about is, in the previous panel talked about kind of the democratization of video game development. We're talking about the democratization of entertainment. You don't have to go to a studio executive. You don't have to have a bunch of experience. You have to have a computer, a phone, and you've got your own live TV experience right there. So one of the reasons that we continue to see 2.2 million people broadcasting every month on Twitch is that there is a professional class. They're called partners. We have about 18,000 of them, and people can subscribe to them for $4.95 a month and also tip them along the way for different things that are happening. So they're raising money using this as well. I imagine a future where organizations are having people, instead of doing cold calls to ask for donations, or doing their own telethon to raise money for something that they're passionate about. Charity is still a very big thing on Twitch as well. We raise millions of dollars a year for charities like St. Jude, who have kind of figured out and kind of built a presence here on Twitch. But I imagine at some point people will raise money for organizations like the ACLU, PBS, whatever your kind of pet project is, people will raise money for that as well. And as the technology gets better, and as you basically have a studio production team of 20 people condensed into a piece of software, I imagine that you will start to see things like news. We've already seen things like cooking and art. For those of you that might not be as familiar with Twitch, when we launched art last year, about 2 years ago, actually it is now. How many people are familiar with Bob Ross, the painter who was on PBS, right? So when we got the rights to Bob Ross, and we put that out there with Twitch chat, and it became an internet phenomenon because it was Twitch before Twitch. It was somebody that was passionate about something that decided that he was going to share that passion with the world. And that's what our gamers do right now on Twitch, and I'm really, really excited to see how other people are really passionate about it. And since we're here talking about education, I have a dream that one day somebody will start teaching every day on Twitch and be able to be a teacher that makes $1 million a year like some of the top people on our platform. Because, to your earlier point, it's all free. But once everybody pulls together and they say, like, I want to support this, I want to be a part of this, the amount of power that people can have when they come together is phenomenal. So I'm really excited about the future in that regard.
If I can just make one quick comment, we have TAs giving office hours on Twitch now.
That's awesome.
So you can watch our people play Super Smash Brothers and ask them questions about visual media. Yep.
Whoa.
That's awesome. We're running tight on the agenda, but let's open it up to some questions for you guys tuning in on Twitch here at ESA's 8th Annual Games and Learning Summit. Feel free to tweet us questions at ESA Gov Affairs. Anyone in the audience?
So I actually have several questions I'd like to talk to you about later, but the one for now is, we're talking about a bridge between entertainment community and real world jobs and such, and most of what we've heard today, and it's only been a very short discussion, an excellent one, very short one, has mostly been about how we use games to educate people for jobs outside of that entertainment industry. My question is, and something of an unproven thesis of mine, is that there's actually a latent knowledge in the gaming community. They just don't understand what it is they know. It's an unknown known. So if you think about, so for instance, we're looking at gaming for resiliency. What is StarCraft and Warcraft if not building resilient communities to outside shocks? So there's probably a lot of theoretical knowledge that you guys inherently understand from their years and years of essentially running simulations that they just haven't had translated them into terms that make sense in the outside world. So my question is for you is how do we do the opposite? If it's a bridge is two-way, how do we bring that knowledge they already have and explain to them what it is they have and how they can apply it, and how those outside of it who perhaps don't understand the gaming community can draw those hours and hours of human simulations?
I'll take a first stab at that. First of all, I would say Constance and maybe some other UCI faculty would be really good people to talk to about that. We definitely appreciate and understand there are some soft skills that you're getting through video games. You mentioned tenacity. I would say communication, critical thinking, problem solving. People are making many decisions a second in video games. You have to think very quickly, and I think conveying those and maybe finding a way to wrap our heads around them so that when people graduate universities or K through 12 institutions, they can kind of share, I guess, those characteristics about themselves or those skills that they've learned. So we are very interested in exploring it. I think there are people that have already published several things on that. I think there's a lot more coming soon. And I think folks at UCI are very interested in some of those questions. I mean, new patches come out every few weeks in the biggest games, and our players will read the patch notes and figure out how the game has changed, how it's balanced. They do the mental calculus to figure out which champions are now more powerful than others. And so all that's happening right now. People are finding the fastest way to kill a boss in World of Warcraft. And so they're having conversations and they're arguing with each other. And I saw Constance present about this a few weeks ago. And so you're totally onto something, and I think there's a lot of people out there very interested in that.
I'll just give one example. In Australia, there's a huge amount of slot machines. Actually, in New South Wales, there's more there than in Las Vegas. It's kind of a dark secret that we have. These things are kind of robbing pensioners, unfortunately. There's a huge amount of money that goes into, I think one of the main companies called Aristocrat, to develop algorithms for compulsion, to create addiction. They use sounds, they use colors, they use a whole variety of different techniques to allow people to become addicted to their machines and lose their pension money. I think to investigate, these algorithms and learning how they do this, and this is happening across games, large game companies all around the world. They're investigating these same things. They're looking at their analytics. Google, I say Unity Connect is really, or Unity Analytics as well, is a great way of kind of observing human behavior. I think that there is almost something that we can do. We can perhaps look at these great companies that are using these algorithms to rob people, learn those algorithms and put them in games that actually benefit people. I think these algorithms exist. It's just kind of using them in the right way. So
I think that you kind of expressed something that is sort of I've internalized for a long time, and I'm going to speak about this just as a person and not as like as a commentator, because I actually don't know the answer. But one of the ways that I've always been very civically minded. I've always been a news junkie. I've always been really interested in politics, and I know for a fact that there is a link between me learning complex systems, playing StarCraft, and playing Civilization, and understanding the way that game theory works and that game mechanics work, and how you apply strategies in order to kind of maximize your return and when you find an advantage, that apply directly to the way that like our entire economic system works and that our entire political system works. And it's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about bringing politics to gamers, because I think that they are uniquely situated to help us solve these problems. Because for them, like, they are able to take in these complex systems to figure out like how are things working, to understand what strategy someone else is applying, what strengths and weaknesses that is going to have, and say, oh no, that's actually not what we should be doing, because if you do this, if we move the new political metagame to this, that is going to be ultimately a much larger win for us as a whole. And I think that there is a huge potential, and I'm so thrilled to know that there are so many people that are actually almost trying to quantify this now with research, and being able to say like this is a measurable impact into the increase in neurological function, or this is a measurable impact to somebody's mood and to somebody's quality of life. So those are all things that I think that there's there's something there. I don't really know what it is and how we can tap into it, but I really hope that that becomes more crystallized over time.
We have time for one more question. Perfect.
I'm just wondering, and this may be too large of a question, but the federal government's always lagged behind a little bit in kind of this area, the VR, the streaming, the understanding of this. I think Constance talked about it a little bit, but the Department of Defense has kind of been the leader, it seems like, in this world. So just wondering if that's accurate, if you all have had any interaction with the Department of Defense in figuring out how they stream or use virtual reality in their training. I think there's a huge amount of growth that we can go there, but we can save money, downsize the amount of resources and people that we need if we had this, if we could stream across the country, across the world to train different people. I'm just wondering what your thoughts is. Is there any other agencies that you've worked with in that area, or is DoD kind of the leader in this for the federal government?
The DoD is definitely spending some money on this. We've consulted with them on making Army simulations, and they've definitely spent a lot more money than like I could fathom, because they brought us on, and when I was there, I was kind of questioning why they even consulted us, because some of the technology that the Army has available to them is much farther than anything we've ever seen. It makes like everything, the Vive, just kind of look like really old school technology. So they definitely are putting quite a lot of money into this. I would say that they're not like using it in the most efficient way. I think that they could be doing a lot of education pushes. Luckily, there have been like some political people, like Michelle Obama, who realized that like this is something that is worth investing in, so she has. But there are other governments that are doing it a lot better. So when we were trying to fund ourselves, we were applying to a lot of grants, and we were trying to start working with vocational schools and medical schools almost immediately in the U.S. And that was just not a thing. We had to completely like circumvent it. We incorporated in Canada instead, because the Toronto Consortium of Colleges was like looking at us, and they were like, we need you to come and to start working on these simulations. And so the government there gave us a bunch of money, subsidized salaries for some of our employees, and offered us artists, and at the same time gave us like approval to actually start training potential surgeons with VR. So Canada's doing it right. The US is doing a lot of things right, but they could be doing it a lot better as well.
Was it DARPA that you used, that you worked with mostly in the DoD, or as you said?
It was DARPA and the DoD.
Hey, Constance and Mark, since we have the benefit, and Erik, of three former White House video game czars who worked on this, do you want to talk a little bit just for a second about the gaming guild within the federal government? How many different agencies are utilizing video games as a tool, and the efforts that you did to sort of rationalize that so they could share their knowledge across, whether they're a DoD or Department of Ag, share the knowledge and the big data they were getting, and not having to recreate the wheel each time?
So I can start that conversation, but you guys are going to have to continue it because my information's old. But I will say, that conversation started out of getting tapped to be in the White House, and I was like, why do you want a video games person? And then starting to realize that the government actually had already been investing in games and had been since like the mid-'80s. If you think about DoD and other investments, right? We've been in that space for a long time, whether you call them simulations, games, whatever it may be. And then when I got there and doing sort of a walking tour and a listening tour of what agencies were funding, it was really clear that you'd have an entity like NIH that has an incredible amount of expertise inside the agency. I mean, I'm talking top scientists who understand their problems, right, that they're trying to solve with national health issues. But they're trying to make investments that would change human behavior. They think interactive media is a really good bet, but they don't know anything about interactive media. So when you look at the investments that were being made across that portfolio as a whole, across the agencies, whether it's CIA or NIH or Department of Education, they were all over the map. So part of what we did, the first thing we did was say, okay, well, what if we got all of you together and actually connected you through ESA and others with people who did know something about games? Who could, for example, you could call when a game's proposal comes through for $5 million and claims it's going to be the moon and the stars and somehow run on this device and teach children natural language.
I could give you someone from EA, or I could give you someone from Twitch, I could give you someone from Blizzard or another company that would actually tell you whether or not that's feasible. So we did that for a good year or so. By the time we left, it was well over 200 people involved in that, federal games working group. And that was across 33 agencies and 4 White House offices. So the idea that there was no interest in leveraging medium, most agencies are willing, agencies are tackling really tough national issues, whether it's transportation or health or whatever. Really there's a certain agnosticism about what kind of medium they use. I would say now I'd be interested in hearing where you guys felt it went after I left in 2012 and 13, just because, how do I put this politely? There have been certain politicians who want to make it a platform to basically alienate most of their young audience by going after games and calling it, the pork report or whatever. And it's unfortunate those conversations continue not based on fact. Because if you were to pool some of the actual aggregated effects of games, I think you would be shocked. Remember the report that Glass Lab did around games, comparing it to traditional medium? And it was like over a grade of a difference. What I'm saying is that just in the vertical of education, if you compare games and traditional medium, Jessica was behind this report, that in fact you get more than a grade bump off of games versus the same thing in books, the same thing in what we do. And I think you see overall the same kind of effect for interactive media. So where was the temperature when, I'll pass it to you. What's the update? Go, Mark.
Well, I'm going to say. So I had the luxury of acquiring the work that you passed along. So Constance started up Federal Games Guild. You were there 2011, 2012, that kind of thing. So I came in, I'm Mark DeLore, I was there 2013, 2014. So I come from the games industry, so my interest was coming in there and saying, hey, as an industry, game developers have a particularly unique set of skills, creating engaging content, getting people interested in actively engaged material. How do we make the transition for those people to get more involved in these other categories of games for change, whether that's education or healthcare or citizen science or whatever. And so one of the things that we did really actively was engage with the Federal Games Guild and try to pull them along and introduce them to people out in the community. I think we had some good news, some bad news, things went well, things went poorly, lots of great experiments. But what was really interesting was that I didn't really have to push, because what happened was all those agency people from NASA, the Department of Ed, NSF, computer science folks, NIH, pretty much it's like every agency was in the room. They wanted to be out there engaging with the community. They had gotten to the point where they realized what we were talking about wasn't games for game's sake. Like the game word wasn't a stopper for them. What they were interested in was, here's this interesting and unique engagement tool. Now how do I use that to accelerate the things that I'm up to? And so one of the tools that turned into a strong outlet for that was the small business grant programs that each agency had. So any agency that's got an R&D budget over X has to spend like 2.3% of that, donating that back as grants to small businesses to encourage development out there in the field. And so particularly NIH and Department of Education funded so many game-related efforts. And Department of Ed, well, both of them continue running forward. Every year I get in touch with Department of Ed folks. There's a guy named Ed Metz at Ed who makes it easy for me. Yeah, he's like an unstoppable force. And he's funding game after game after game at different levels. So look that up if you're interested in games for learning. It's the SBIR program, the Department of Ed. And so Erik Martin and I, we collaborated on a few things towards the end of my term. One of them was a big game jam for Games for Learning with cooperation from a bunch of agencies. And it's completely nuts. But I'll tag this up with Erik and let him...
all I would add is the dream is still alive. The interagency working group is still meeting. Happy to put people in touch with those groups. I think a lot of the game stuff fell into broader policy initiatives, where there was CS for All was a drumbeat we made around computer science education access across the country. National Week of Making, we put out a presidential declaration of making to encourage, unique individual people to come up with and be empowered to build things in their own backyards and then turn that into businesses, including on the virtual side of making. And also, in education specifically, I think we really made some big deep dives on policy to see if like something could. I think that's a much longer game, but like we had the Every Student Succeeds Act, replace No Child Left Behind, and as part of that came demonstration authority for a bunch of states to be able to try other types of assessment besides standardized testing in specific local cases where they wouldn't be punished by the Department of Ed in not getting specific funding because they weren't doing what everyone else was doing, which would open the door for students to be able to do like portfolio-based assessment, and kids could be even making their own games as assessment. We'll see if like that actually happens and where that goes, and obviously there are large distracting things going on right now, but like things are still happening, and there are good people in the Department of Ed in a bunch of the agencies, and with VR and AR too, not everyone has the DoD's R&D budget. That's where a lot of these like more consumer-facing headsets are actually really useful. Is NOAA or FEMA can come up with flood zone data and make a VR experience that is helping you visualize that kind of thing. And they can experiment with that stuff at a much lower cost, and are eager to engage with a lot of these new emerging VR and AR industry groups to do that kind of research. And we also launched a prize challenge for the EdSim prize challenge, which was specifically focused on VR and AR for career and technical education, which is probably one of the most powerful use cases for the technology. So things are happening despite all of the cloud overhead. So it's great.
Fantastic. Speaking of keeping the dream alive, we wanted to thank you guys so much for being with us today. We are incredibly fortunate and grateful to have you, and we are incredibly excited to be working in this industry with these cutting-edge leaders on emerging tech. So round of applause for this panel as we wrap up this session. And I'm happy to introduce my colleague and fearless champion at the Entertainment Software Association, Stan Pierre-Louis. Our general counsel is going to do a quick overview on our games agenda.
All right. Where's the camera? I love the camera. Oh, this microphone. Doesn't want to cooperate. I thought I'd spend a few minutes just talking about where we are on some public policy priorities. It's funny that there were some themes that ran through both of the panels this morning about creativity, about innovation, about analytics, and all those things feed into what we desire as the ecosystem for video games, interactive media, interactive entertainment, whatever we want to call it, because we're agnostic. We just want to make sure that this art form and this innovation keeps propelling itself. I'm looking around here in the room, and we've got representatives from HoloLens, Magic Leap. I know that the Switch is watching because Marlo was tweeting earlier. And all these things come about because we care about a lot of these policy issues that help the entire industry. We're very much a complicated industry, and yet we do a lot of things that other folks do. We just do it differently. And one of the keys for us is being able to do that by growing high-tech jobs and growing innovation. And growing high-tech jobs is a huge, important part, because we've got to continue what we talked about this morning, which is largely education, STEAM and STEM from the earliest of ages, helping people transition from where they are now to the jobs of the future. And so that means retrofitting jobs and thinking about what you do now and how you fix it. There was a story I read about a company that was working on augmented reality, and they were in Kentucky, and they didn't have a lot of resources, and so they transitioned some former coal miners into coders. And so now you've got Kentucky coders making games who used to be coal miners. And that's kind of an incredible thing about looking at rural areas and how that grows. And that's one of the important things also about technology for us, is how do you grow broadband? How do you get it into rural areas? How do you expand it so everyone has access? Because that's not just the future for us, but the future for an information society. That also feeds into the need for more jobs to get filled here within our industry. We're one of the few growing industries. We not only export what we do, but we import a lot of talent. And with the immigration laws that they are today, it limits our ability to fill the jobs we have now. Our members range from these huge multinational companies to small mom and pops. But what they have is a desire to fill those jobs. And particularly for the multinationals, they can fill them here or they can fill them elsewhere because they've got that capability. When you talk to them, they'd rather fill them here because of the systems we have in place. And so that's one of the things we're looking at is growing high-tech innovation and jobs, both through education, but also trying to get people here to fill those jobs and creating those devices, those games, everything here. The other piece of innovation that's really important is intellectual property, and that's been at the bedrock principle for our industry since its beginning. On the patent front, there have been a lot of issues with so-called non-practicing entities that have been affecting our organizations and lots of other organizations. The Supreme Court handled one big aspect of that last month on venue, where you can get sued, and that's a major accomplishment. But there are other areas of patent reform, including shifting attorneys' fees and those sorts of things that would stop the frivolous lawsuits that come our way. So that's one of the things we're continuing to look at. On the copyright side, we've been one of the strongest advocates for strong copyright and trying to think about how we protect our technical protection measures and all those things, but also how we modernize our copyright office. We don't view that as political, we view that as operational. And it's pretty critical that we continue to do those things that benefit us on that creative side. Another big issue that we're going to be looking at this year, and we've already engaged with this administration and with Congress on, is trade. Trade has been on the top of everyone's agenda lately. Our president's made a lot of noise about what we ought to be doing, changing from multilateral to bilateral and the like. And one of the things we've said is, look, we're really interested in making sure we get the best deals for us and making sure that we can do what we want to do. So on immigration, that's an important piece of it. Obviously, exporting our great intellectual property laws to other countries that don't have the same level of protections, but also looking at digital trade, because a lot of times, a lot of these agreements were made years ago before e-commerce was where it was. And now we're looking at new ways of connecting. You used to play games in arcades and on your consoles, and then that moved to handhelds, and that still happens. I've got a 10-year-old, so the 3DS is never further than this away at any given time unless it's being charged. This is true. And now it's summer, so it's going to be like this the whole time. But with mobile, and now with everything being connected, even if you buy a disc to play your game, you can still be connected through Xbox Live or Sony PlayStation. And that means that you've got to have rules that allow you to play in all of these different regions in a way that's fair. And so some countries, for example, have been requiring that you localize data, meaning open up a server either in a government-run facility or someone who we've approved in our country. And what does that do? That exposes our intellectual property to possible theft. That exposes consumer data to privacy concerns in countries where they don't have the same values as we do on civil liberties and the like. And so we've been fighting some of those kinds of issues on digital trade. Also thinking about data protection and privacy. And that's one of the bedrock principles that we've had here in this country, and that's helped us grow our businesses. But more and more we're seeing threats, like even governments saying, hey, we've got to be able to get into your data, we need a backdoor, so stop with all that encryption and at least let us in. And one of the things we fought back both in the US and abroad is saying, look, there's a lot that we're protecting, but if you let one in, you let everyone in, and we can't have that. And so we've been pushing back pretty strongly on that. We've also been supporting an effort to modernize ECPA, the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, saying you need not just a subpoena, you need a warrant, and you just give notice to our consumers both here and abroad. And that's been gaining some traction. We'll see where it goes as Congress, because there's a lot of things on their plate right now, but that was something gaining steam at the end of the last Congress, and something we'll be looking at here. Data breach issues. 47 states have different rules about when you notify, how you notify, how many days, what the form looks like, and then you expand that around the world. It's kind of chaotic. Getting something that's systemized, operationalized, and simple and streamlined is something we'd like, and hopefully Congress can take up at some point in the near future. And then last but certainly not least, one of the things that's been a bedrock principle for our industry from the very beginning, and I think really helps with creativity, is First Amendment, right? Having the ability to have free expression is critical, is one of the reasons we were founded in 1994, and one of the things we push for. I was in the film industry before, and we were having a lot of investment from other countries, and they could figure out the technical aspects of what we were doing. Because when you get really smart people in a room and they start collaborating, cross-pollination happens, and you can figure out how to make a great movie, a great game. But they could never figure out why our games were so successful. Why are we the leaders here? And the largest reason that they omit is that we have free expression, and free expression sometimes means getting criticized by not just your consumers, but by your citizens, right? And that helps build this creative work. A lot of the games we're talking about that are hits, if you sat down in a room and said, I'd like $5 million or $10 million or $100 million to make this game about X, you'd say, I don't know about that. And then when you see what happens when you put it together, you realize allowing that freedom to happen gives you something you could have never imagined. And that's why we have such a robust industry, and that's why at noon today, when you guys get over to E3 and experience it, you're going to see what's next and what's coming down the road. Now, one of the things we've done, even though we don't have to, is we self-regulate. We've got the Entertainment Software Rating Board that tells you E is for everyone, E plus 10, what have you. That gives consumers, especially parents, information about what they need. And that's actually been a net plus. And in fact, we've done it so well that the FTC has praised our efforts more than any other media industry. They've said what you guys do, the rules you put out, the clarity, and the compliance, because they'll go and do undercover buys and go to GameStop and send someone young and try to get a purchase made, and they say, sorry, you look a little too young for that, I've got to card you. They've looked at even our compliance, where we can't be everywhere all the time, and they've said, wow, you guys have implemented a really strong program. So even with the First Amendment, we're able to figure out a way to self-regulate without diminishing the ability of creators to really create. So I don't want to take too long, but I'd love to answer any other questions you might have, and I would also invite Erik, if he's around, to answer any questions you guys might have on some of the policy issues, things that are bothering you, things you think where we can be helpful, or we can provide a better explanation of what we do. Yes?
Net neutrality, and what its future looks like, basically, given the recent affronts by the current administration as well as other governments around the world.
Sure. So net neutrality means lots of things to lots of different people. So in the broad scheme of things, I think it's that we all want to be able to access the internet in a way that's easy to access without a lot of favoritism, right, by others. Now, how that gets regulated changes depending on where you sit in that structure. And a lot of the debate has been about whether it's covered by what they call Title I or Title II, and how that gets governed. I mean, we're still forming our position on where we land on the new proposal, but from our perspective, the key things that we're going to be looking for are you inhibiting the ability to expand the broadband deployment? Are you inhibiting the ability of not only consumers but also us, because we're using these systems to be able to get to consumers in an effective way? And what is the role that ISPs want to play in this process? Because many of them have voluntarily agreed to certain restrictions, either because they think it's the right move for consumers, because they've merged with other companies, and as part of those agreements they've agreed no matter what happens we're going to follow that. So I think we're now in the process where it was just announced. There's what they call an NPRM, a notice for public rulemaking, and comments due in July. We're still looking at where it's going, but we think there's a path forward, and we're working with our members on figuring out how to make that happen. I think there's a lot of rhetoric around it, and I think it's always useful to have all the voices in, but I think for us, we're trying to figure out what are you actually trying to accomplish, and will the rules in place allow us to get us there and treat us all fairly, both for gamers and for producers, publishers that we represent. Great question. Anyone else?
Not to take up all the space, but I do have a question on kind of the financial side of gaming. I'm fairly a novice on this, but learning that there's huge amounts of money exchanged in some of these games. So that's largely unregulated as far as I understand. Is there discussion on that? Like, what do you see happening kind of in the regulation of the services provided in games, and the money exchange in games?
Well, I don't know if it's been an issue so much as different models of games. So, there's the one-to-one model where I buy the game and I play it, or I insert a coin into a machine and I play it. A lot of the games you're talking about now are kind of freemium models where you're playing a certain amount for free. And you can continue to play for free, but then there are opportunities within game to either buy up or to buy different items or to earn items different ways. And I think that's what the marketplace is trying to figure out, how to sort through all those things. I don't necessarily think it needs regulation so much as awareness, right? And so one of the great things about what ESRB does about games generally is it provides information to consumers, especially parents, on what's going on. And I think the same thing's here. A lot of disclosures will tell you what's going on. Where people really run into problems is where they're not disclosing things, or they're not really being fair, or there are cheats and hacks in the games. And so from our perspective, it's important to take that out. But in terms of the game, as long as you have awareness, it's really about being a conscientious consumer.
Stan, what about in-game currency, which is maybe
more services that you're buying, if somebody makes you clothes, that kind of thing inside the game, like where it's people to people sometimes.
Well, I mean, I think it's probably, there are probably plenty of laws already within the state. A lot of that is not really federal regulation. A lot of that is subject to state laws. So you have a lot of state attorney generals and state rules that affect how that works. And so it's really individual state run. And most of it really stays in game. A lot of times the concern with some of the other games is when you go out of game. And it's really not games that do that as much as other aspects of the web. So I think from our perspective, there are probably plenty of state rules that govern that, and it's probably not the subject that's going to be a federal regulation anytime soon.
You don't see anybody in the local states that are going towards this or looking at?
No, what I'm saying is there are rules that apply, and it's a matter of them applying them. I'm saying I don't think new rules are needed so much as enforcement of the rules that already exist. A lot of times there's this famous, I'm getting real nerdy here, but there's a professor at University of Chicago who's also a judge on the Seventh Circuit named Judge Easterbrook, and he wrote this article called The Law of the Horse. And his basic argument was at the beginning of the internet age, every law school class was like the internet and this, or every class was the internet and that. And he's like, you don't need a new law for the internet, you just need to apply laws that exist. Because if you have a horse, you don't have the law for the horse. And I think that applies here, which is there are plenty of rules that surround a lot of the conduct you're concerned about, and it's a matter of people enforcing those because they're subject to rules already, whether it's disclosures or marketing or what have you.
Or taxation is what I was thinking.
It may.
One last
Yes.
question. You spoke briefly on how there's 46 different...
47.
47.
Plus Puerto Rico, Guam, DC.
Yeah, across the states and the countries. Can you give us a sense of, the net cost that's placing on the industry? I mean, I'm sure it's creating a lot of jobs and compliance and video gaming, and, how it's inhibiting the industry's ability.
Well, it's interesting. It's not something that just affects the video game industry. It really affects not only all online companies, but anytime any company has a data breach, there's the cost. There's the cost of paying your lawyers, right? And there's the cost of postage and the cost of sending out those notices. But there's also a cost of productivity, because now you've got to figure out how am I complying in all these various states. So even if you're hiring outside counsel, they've got to interview you on what's going on. You've got to bring in computer forensics experts to take a look at what's happening in your system, and if hopefully you've done a lot of the work pre-baked. So it's hard to put a number on it. I'm sure someone has put a number on it, and there are websites dedicated to this issue. But it's a tremendous cost when it happens. It debilitates your organization until you can get past it, because it's the next most important thing you're doing. And particularly if it's public, it's the crisis of the day, and nothing else matters about what you do until you solve this. You're not getting any other headlines. Your new games aren't being touted as much until you fix this problem because your consumers are upset.
Going on that problem, would you think it would be more beneficial in the coming years or whatnot for there to be that public-private information partnership where you would have maybe a hub like DHS, which is able to gather the information but also share with those individuals who comply, and that way it kind of lessens the data breach, or if there is a breach, those within the information sharing community can actually talk to one another about how they...
There have been some efforts at that already, looking at cybersecurity generally. So there's the ability under federal law to have public-private partnerships and also private companies. And in fact, at the time this was being debated, both the FTC and the DOJ Antitrust Division came out and said, look, we think it's so important that you share information not only with us but with yourselves, amongst yourselves, that we're telling you it is not a per se antitrust violation for you to get together and share this information, because that way you're going to see the common threads of these threats that are coming about. So there is federal legislation that allows for private parties to meet and to work with government on that. It's a matter of how do you make those things work functionally.
Have they been working functionally? In your opinion?
Certainly on the private sector side they have, and I think with the public sector it's still a work in progress, but we're getting there. But thank you all, really appreciate it. I know it's time for break and for the tour, but thank you for coming out to this event, and thank you, Erik, for running such
Well, thank you, Stan. Greatly appreciated. Just to give you a quick logistics on the rest of the day, we're going to break for a quick 3-minute biology break, and then we're going to gather for the tour of USC. USC is consistently ranked #1 by the Princeton Review for games teaching video game design, and both for graduates and undergraduate. There are 496 schools that teach it. USC is consistently at or near #1, and so you're going to get a glimpse into the best students some of the best students in the country at one of the best universities in the country, really designing the future. So raise your hand if you're going to E3 later today. It looks like pretty much everybody. If you're not and you're interested, please see Carrie and I at the break. Just want to end with 2 quick plugs. A lot of talk about games and impact. The institution that was country before country was cool on that was Games for Change. You know, going back 8 or 10 years, we're saying there's actually a there there, and they spent a long time proving that hypothesis. The Games for Change Festival is in New York, August 31st, July 31st. August 1st and August 2nd. So if you're interested in continuing this conversation, they've got great programming, including many of the speakers you saw here today. Full disclosure note: I'm on the board, but nevertheless, they do fantastic work. And I want to end by just a quick point of privilege. One of the things we do is this matchmaking thing, and so many great programs, including Glass Lab and a number of the things we talked about today, came out of this. To Stan's point about teaching coal miners in West Virginia coding skills and the need to upskill our workforce. So much of the talk around Silicon Valley and the talk about change and innovation, when people hear this in a lot of middle America, and I'm from West Virginia and Western Pennsylvania, they think that doesn't apply to me. They don't realize, they say, I'm never going to get in a car and I'm never going to move to Redwood Shores. But they don't realize that there's technology and innovation happening all around, and we need, and we're working with the new administration, and we're working with Senator Joe Manchin on what our industry can do to teach coding skills. So I would like to close with 2 minutes from Jonathan and Amanda, if you guys could come up. They're from a group called Mind Minds, and Senator Joe Manchin introduced them to me. They're emblematic of this discussion, but also emblematic of the types of discussions that happen here. And you know, whether you're the Atlantic Council or Unity, or so many of the discussions here, I think, lend themselves to future partnerships. So we want to close with Jonathan and Amanda, just a quick 2 minutes, then we'll do a break and do the quick tour, and then we'll all head to E3.
We can't tell you how much we appreciate being here in front of all of you. So Jonathan and I teach out-of-work coal miners how to write software. We have background in software development, and I actually grew up in southwestern Pennsylvania, and my little brother was a coal miner, and he started to tell me about all of his friends being laid off at work and saying he didn't really know what he was going to do to provide for his family. So Jonathan and I, with our background in software development and the impossibility of hiring software developers in the United States, living in Chicago, trying to hire people to write code was absolutely impossible. So we were going overseas, as I'm sure most of you are doing as well, or have done at one point in your career or another.
So we saw these 2 things: the areas where we're working, West Virginia, Southwest Pennsylvania, and across Appalachia, regions that have been really hard hit by decline in some of the traditional industries, particularly coal mining, with communities needing new alternatives and not having the opportunities or realizing there are opportunities within tech. And then the flip side, that there are so many unfilled jobs within tech, within software development, that need filling and that need a diverse workforce. We see here that 41% of gamers are women, 3 in 10 adults playing games are over 50. And so in order to build those games, you know, we should have the diverse workforce creating them. And it's a great thing working in these rural areas where people we're seeing are not thinking, you know, if I'm not 20, I'm not going to be a software developer. We have all sorts of people from all sorts of backgrounds thinking in different ways, creating tech that is, you know, for everyone to use.
Yeah, so there's kind of the meme that 20-year-olds in Silicon Valley are solving problems for 20-year-olds in Silicon Valley. Well, the problems that our developers are solving are more social impact. So a lot of the things that have been talked about this morning, healthcare, things like the heroin epidemic that's going on in Appalachia. Our developers are asking questions like, how do we solve that problem? And I think there's probably a real synergy here where we can start to talk about what can we do with gaming that can help to solve some of these real social problems that these people are facing, at the same time that we're providing new career directions for them. It's quite good to work with people who are looking to say, hey, I want to do good things and make good money. And by good money, I mean $50,000, $60,000 a year as opposed to $200,000, $300,000 a year that we pay in the Silicon Valley. So it's just a kind of a culmination of a lot of really good things coming together that we're really excited about, and we're excited to have conversations with you all about how can we provide gaming opportunities for these folks who they've grown up playing games their entire lives, and their dream is to be building gaming software. So bringing these two things together is really quite exciting for us. Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you. Thank you both. Well, with that, listen, this is real and personal. My dad was a coal miner in western Pennsylvania. My grandfather, great-grandfather, and great-great-grandfather. But it's a larger conversation than that. This is a conversation that needs to take place about upskilling. And here in the video game industry, everybody who's in this industry believes, it's in our DNA, believes in the transformative power of this technology. They've seen it happen. And you're going to meet the brightest and most visionary people this afternoon and this morning who are going to make it happen. So we're really appreciative of everybody's time and attention this morning. Wishing you a very terrific and happy E3. I can guarantee you it's going to be eye-popping. I got to